Welcome to the Adventure Mechanic side quest, and it's me, Chandler. With the holidays in the rearview mirror, I've come up against this unenviable situation. I've been officially working on Cartogrator for over a year. Sure, I haven't worked on it as much as if it was my real day job, but I still haven't gotten nearly enough of it done. I've taken a look at my version control history, and I've got to say, it's a sorry sight. There are periods of manic pushes coupled with rather large swaths of, well, nothing. Some of those lulls were due to personal issues, but most were due to a lack of inspiration. I've had trouble refining the main gameplay loop in my head for quite some time. I've only recently come up with things for the player to do that fit diegetically. With those last pieces in place, I think I have a relatively good foundation to start executing on the game. Artwork continues to be a struggle for me, and sound design hasn't even come up yet. That being said, those things aren't something I had to focus on quite yet. But now the project is to the point where coming up with ideas is finally ending, and it's time to look at something I haven't really done for a game: production work. For today's side quest, I'm going to talk about production and keeping momentum going on a project. Now, I know I just did a side quest on motivation, and you may wonder why I'm talking about momentum. They're roughly similar in terms of goals and results, so why focus on something so close to it? Well, honestly, it's because of the difference between the two. Motivation is about starting, momentum is about continuing. That is one step closer to the end product, after all. More importantly, that's what you need to do for production. All of it is in service of that end goal, getting the game out the door and into the listener's hands. Motivation is the micro issue every day. Momentum is the issue for every update. I'm not going to be obtuse and say it's a macro issue, but it certainly is an issue. Without momentum, you can easily get stuck in the swamps of game design. And oh boy, you do not want to get stuck there. Trust me. First, let me clarify what the swamps of game design actually are. They're the time between your first prototype and final polishing. That time where you're not quite sure the design is actually fun. You're in production, yeah, but you're not done with tooling up yet. There are times when momentum is absolutely sucked from you. The swamps may be short, or they may be a long time. BioWare programmer and producer Mark Dara somewhat loathingly describes the end of the swamps as quote-unquote BioWare magic. This is that magic point where productivity shoots through the roof and the roadmap to finish the game finally hits something more realistic than finishing, a decade from now. Now, to be clear, that magic point is also a sign of crunch in a team, and I highly recommend listening to Mark Dara's reasoning on why you shouldn't use the term BioWare magic at all. But that's not really why I brought it up. It's more so because of that time before suddenly becoming more productive. The times where you're struggling to find the fun in the game, to get the real core of what the game you are developing should be. Time spent in the swamp can be short, or it can take years. How can you avoid, or at the very least minimize it? Well, that's by keeping momentum. Keeping momentum going in your project is rough. If you need any proof, take a look at any devlog for an eventually abandoned game on YouTube. In those, you can see solo devs spending a year or more on a single project, only to end up abandoning it later. They may have lost motivation, they may have had a life event that prevents them from developing it further, who knows. Whatever the reason though, their game is only left visible in those devlog videos, a stark reminder of what could have been. Now for some of those games, they were appropriately abandoned. Others, not so much. One thing that is common in most of those projects that I've seen is that the developer tends to spend more time producing the devlog updates than actually working on their project. That's certainly not true with all of those projects by any means, but I've seen enough of the developers wanting to talk about the game and produce quote-unquote sizzle reels over actually getting the game done. After all, time spent on producing other things can take away from the project itself. Sometimes you just need to walk away from it and come back with a fresh mind. But if you're working on a consumable related to the game that isn't in service to the end goal, you really are taking away from it. Looking at you, Chandler. So, how can you avoid that fate and keep on track? Well, in perfect honesty, I'm not really a good model to look at. That doesn't mean I don't know what's necessary to get the project done, though. Small wins are key. They are the things that you look back at and can point at that you've completed or are really proud of. That doesn't mean amazing artwork or really appropriate soundtrack or sound effect either. It means making the main menu, the option screen, all the small things that make a game feel complete. Sure, there may be some days where you look back at what you've worked on and not really be able to point at anything, but you need to keep those days to a minimum. Even if it's a tiny improvement, completing that one feature or even tweaking it to make it feel better will keep momentum going. In the game forum I'm part of, we have a saying, no 0 weeks. The real quote is no 0 days, but most of the forum goers have day jobs and a family and can't necessarily work on game design every day, hence why we changed it to weeks. The point still stands though. If you want to get a job done, you need to put time in to finish it. It'll never get done if you don't put in that time. And for me, at least, that means having small wins every time I sit down to work on Cartographer. That little bit of dopamine keeps me wanting to come back and work on it. That's not to say that's the only way to keep momentum. Another way to keep momentum is having some form of accountability. It may be something you announce publicly or to yourself, but having accountability will force you to have someone or some time to be done with your game. I know I literally just railed against devs that did this and quit, but dev journals can be one of those methods to make yourself accountable. I personally don't find them really motivating since that accountability is more nebulous than anything, and having a friend that will take you to task when you're not done with what you said you would be is more helpful in my case. A public dev journal does provide some sort of that accountability though. If that's going to be enough of accountability to get your game done, do it. Personally, I need something more to keep myself on task though. As I just said, I am part of a game developer forum. Part of that is updating everyone on what you've done over the last week. It's not a whole lot more accountability, but having to say that you haven't gotten much or anything done on your project gives me that tiny little bit of guilt that I need to keep making progress on it. So far, that little bit of accountability has been enough to keep me working on Cartographer a lot longer than I have on many of my other game designs. Having to update a group on a regular interval is what helps me the most in terms of keeping accountability. Whatever you use to keep accountability, though, make sure that you're not losing the end goal of having it in the first place. Getting the game out the door is the top priority. If you're no longer getting value from one form of accountability, jettison it. If that accountability isn't helping you get closer to your goal, change its form or ditch it entirely. Accountability is only as good a motivator as you allow it to be. If that accountability changes to something else and becomes maybe another hobby or whatever, make sure you find a replacement. Most importantly, if you don't get motivation from the accountability, don't spend time trying to conjure it up. Switch to a different strategy that works for you. On that note, one last way to keep momentum going is to make a timeline or a short-term goal for what needs to get done. In more formal company environments, I would be advocating for Scrum or sprints. In this case, I'm advocating for chunking out the work into as small as pieces as possible to get the game done. It's not sexy or even interesting for that matter, but it works. Small pieces are just easier to finish over getting something huge done. That ties into my first method, going for the smaller wins. Having small pieces planned out can prepare for just that situation. I may not like the concept of mixing work and my hobby, but this is genuinely one thing I've pulled from my professional life into my personal life that has helped me. The important thing is not to plan everything out in such detail that you feel like it's just executing to finish the game. Things change in design, and when they inevitably do, you'll be just throwing away that effort that you did earlier if they're no longer relevant. And that's just wasting effort that can be put towards the game itself. So, plan in smaller chunks and get those parts done. Then repeat that cycle as many times as needed. And if you find yourself getting overwhelmed by the pieces you've made, that's a pretty good sign you aren't done breaking up your work. I'm currently in the throes of doing exactly that for Cartographer. I'll make another update for that when I'm done planning it out, though. Well, that's about all that I have for this side quest. Hopefully you found it entertaining, if not enlightening. As always, if you have any questions, ideas, or comments, reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @JCSuron. I'll talk to you next time.